560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I'm a little concerned about President Biden's announced trip to East Palestine, Ohio.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I want to make sure that somebody has told the big guy that's not where the leader of Hamas lives. Because I don't want
37%
I
of
don't want him.
teenage girls.
I don't want him to waste a trip. That's my concern there. But I did want to go back to something that we discussed a bit earlier in the show as we were reviewing that ceasefire resolution passed in their infinite wisdom by the Chicago City Council, with Mayor BLM Brandon casting the tie-breaking vote. And a caller we got, too, talking about, well, wait a second, the UN is on board with the ceasefire. Oh, sure, of course. And South Africa has brought this case to the International Criminal Court for genocide and apartheid. You know, these are customary accusations from the terrorist apologist crowd, which is half of the city council and the mayor of Chicago included. But just a reminder, questions were asked about the United Nations Relief and Works Agency after the October 7th terrorist attack. Like, is this an organization we should be financing? We, meaning the United States. What is their relationship with Hamas? They deal exclusively in Gaza. And this was the answer of questions about the relationship between that UN agency and a designated terrorist organization, Hamas, the party responsible for the greatest atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. This was the response from our State Department and one of its spokeshumans, Matt Miller.
They are, I will say, as I said a moment ago, actually they're on the front lines. UNRWA staff putting their lives at risk to get food, water, medicine to children, to babies, to civilians. So we absolutely support the work that they're doing.
Okay, in light of that Jerusalem Post report, of 100 Hamas terrorists confirmed to have graduated from UNRWA schools, what level of terrorist involvement with UNRWA will it take to motivate President Biden to condemn the UNRWA terrorist organization?
So we always condemn terrorism, and I think that's pretty clear just based on what you hear me say from this podium every day and what you've heard me say about Hamas since October 7th. But I do want to reiterate what I said about the life-saving work that UNRWA is doing and how important it is that that work not just continue, but that it be expanded. We would welcome other countries increasing their levels of support to UNRWA because we really do think the work they're doing is essential.
So that's people who should know better. That's your State Department spokeshuman. And so what we find out is, yes, the Biden administration condemns terrorism, particularly when they finance it. 12 employees of UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, including 7 primary or secondary school teachers.
I know.
Were material supporters of the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th. The intelligence provided by the Israelis, they provided weapons.
Right.
Among other, and as well as intel and other information. So they were collaborators in that October 7th terrorist attack. Now I know that, that's a small fraction of the number of employees of UNRWA. What kind of defense is that? Because that's the one being offered. Interestingly, 13, this was a good piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day from Naftali Balanson, who is the head of an NGO that monitors this sort of terrorist activity and the interconnections. The South African petition in the International Court of Justice. 13 of the footnotes in that South African petition cite UNRWA in support of its claim that the Jewish state is waging genocide against the Palestinians and is an apartheid state. South African communists citing terrorist sympathizers to accuse Israel of genocide and apartheid. You keeping score?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend KT McFarland. Of course, KT was the Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. She's also the author of the bestseller Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with Dan and Amy.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. So, all of this business, both domestically and internationally, of trying to rally for Hamas, and with the administration sort of, again, giving middling rhetoric to try to salve the fragile egos of some of their more intemperate constituents.
Yeah, in the Trump administration, we understood that a lot of the supplies, food, humanitarian supplies, medicines that the UN was giving to the Palestinians were going directly to Hamas, either directly because the UN agency handed them off happily or because Hamas stole them out of the warehouses and it was never reported. So we cut back on American direct contributions to the relief organizations in Gaza because we thought what was happening was that they weren't going to the people. They weren't going to the women and the children who needed them. They were going directly to Hamas. And if Hamas people couldn't use them, they then sold them on the black market, and then they made money from that. So we did not feel that American taxpayers should fund Hamas, and it sadly turned out that we were correct. Now, the Biden administration comes in, reverses all that. Money goes back to these agencies, which immediately goes into the pockets of Hamas, and then you see Hamas is well enough equipped and rich enough to launch those October 7th attacks. It was only a matter of time before Hamas did that, and we're now living with the consequences. Now, the UN, the State Department spokesman, a little bit vague on his face, had to say, well, the United States is cutting back now. We're not going to give money directly to that UN agency. But it really begs the point. What's the United Nations? We're the biggest supporters of the United Nations, right? We pay the majority of the budget. We give them the free land in New York and the pricey real estate of Manhattan. And what do? Are they supporting what they're supposed to support globally, or has it been turned into a weapon to use against democracy, to use against freedom, to use against human rights? And the UN, if I was stunned, Amy, let me just tell you, I went to a Christmas party at the United Nations, and right before Christmas, so I'm walking along, there's a huge visitor's entrance, wall upon wall of pictures and celebrations and all the stuff you would normally see in a big public space. You know what it was devoted to?
What?
The suffering of the Palestinian people on the West Bank and the evil Israelis. That was at the United Nations. They're putting that right in your face. So they're making it's no secret, as Dan just talked about, that the UN does not support Israel. It is anti-Semitic, and it is supporting terrorists.
You know what that UN building, since you brought it up in New York, would be great for? Migrant Center.
Yes.
And then the UN, all the world could live their values.
That's a big lobby. They could put a lot of illegal immigrants.
Exactly.
Do they have showers? If they have showers, we're all set. We'll be great. So, KT, I wanted to ask you about Iran. Obviously, those 3 poor soldiers were killed while they were sleeping in their beds, and there's been 165 plus attacks. Biden said he's going to do something, but what pain is he planning for Iran? Like a strongly worded letter or something more sinister?
Well, there are really 3 options. There are 3 military options. Number 1 would be to continue what they've done, which is to do nothing, turn the other cheek, maybe make some symbolic gesture, strong letter to the United Nations. Number 2 would be sort of dialing it up, and that would be to go after the proxies. So the proxy forces, Iran pays for them, trains them, gives them ammunition, directs them, but they don't directly, or they're not located in Iran proper. They're in Yemen, they're in Lebanon, they're in Syria, they're in Iraq, but they're doing the job of the Iranian military. And then finally, it would be a direct attack on Iran. I worry that the direct attack Iran would give them the fig leaf they need to say that they're a nuclear weapons state and then have nuclear weapons within a week's time. I'm all in favor of that middle option, but to do it very robustly, to take out, not just degrade by 20% the ammunition dumps and the missile launchers and all the things that are in Yemen and Iraq and Syria, in Lebanon, but to take them out 100%, and then to have very strong economic measures, including potentially even a blockade of Iran. You know, with the Trump administration, again, we were tough on Iran, and we had sanctions that Iran could not sell oil overseas. And it shut it down. Iran was broke. They were bankrupt. Plus the price of oil, even if they could sort of smuggle some of it out to sell, they weren't making much money out of it. The Iranian people were really angry because their bread prices went up, their cost of living went up, their lives it just sort of cratered economically. And yet the Biden administration comes in, if Trump wanted it, we don't want it. And so they allow Iran to sell oil on the open market. And then in addition to that, the price of oil is sky high. So Iran's really rich right now. We should shut all that stuff down.
Yeah, I wanted to get your reaction to something that Joe Kent said earlier this week. He was on with Tucker, and he's a Green Beret. He's a Republican candidate for Congress in Washington State. Again, he lost his wife in bombing in Syria, who was also a military. She was a cryptographer about 5 years ago, as you know. And something he said, though, particularly in response to the immediate response from like Lindsey Graham, John Cornyn about bombing Iran right away, Nikki Haley saying something sort of like that. We should go after their leadership once they're not inside Iran, but once they come out of Iran, we should, a la Soleimani, we should target their leadership. So something that Joe Kent said about this response from the neocons, and I want to get your reaction.
You just are kowtowing to Vladimir Putin. It's the exact same mentality that got us into the Iraq war. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And look, Tucker, I would love to come on here and defend neoconservatism as someone who, lost my late wife in these wars, as somebody who lost countless friends, as somebody who fought myself 11 combat deployments. I spent most of my 20s and 30s in Iraq. I would love to tell you it had worked, but it simply did not. And that's a very hard thing to admit. I get into arguments all the time with fellow veterans about this exact same topic. So I think a lot of this is literally the gambler's fallacy. There's a lot of people who think, hey, if we just keep trying, if we keep attempting to spread freedom through the barrel of a gun and trillions of US dollars, this time it's going to work. Let's just double down. And this is, how really nice casinos are built in Las Vegas off of this exact same mentality. So I think that combined with the financial interest from Lockheed Martin and every single defense contractor and, putting someone like Lloyd Austin as the Secretary of Defense, who's still on the board at Raytheon, I think that factor with that mentality and people not being able to admit that we got this wrong and then making adjustments to our policy.
What do you think, KT?
I could not have said it better, and I could not have said it with more personal experience and heart as that man spoke. But it's absolutely right. The neocons they're always looking for another war. And part of it is that the defense industry makes a lot of money on another war. But let's be smart about it. How often do we have to have these forever wars before we learn the lesson, whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan or even Libya? Now we're thinking, let's go after Iran for another forever war. Let's just be smart about it and use we're not good at that kind of stuff. We don't win those wars, as Joe said. But what we are really good at is using economic weapons. We're good at cyber weapons. We're good at technology, and employ those weapons the same way Reagan won the Cold War. We didn't beat the Soviet Union on a battlefield. We beat them economically. We bankrupted them. We manipulated oil prices and various other things to bankrupt the Soviet Union. I'm all for bankrupting Russia today, and with regard to Ukraine, I'm all for bankrupting Iran. Use the economic weapon, and then the people themselves, they take care of it. The Iranian people, if they're bankrupt, if their standard of living is so collapsed, guess what? No more mullahs.
But I have to ask though too. We don't enforce sanctions against Iran. We give them a glide path to nuclearization. We do a cash for hostages deals. And so we provide them these resources, this underwriting, if you will. That weakness is provocative. So that's the response. I wonder if it's an anticipated response, since we're financing directly or indirectly terror. I mean, pretty soon the largest state sponsor of terror in this world is not going to be Iran. It's going to be the United States if this president continues on at this pace. And I wonder if this sort of underwriting plus a demonstration of weakness is purposeful.
mean, are they intending to encourage terror? I can't.
Are they intending to encourage? This is sort of a war party argument, but are they intending to encourage conflict for the sort of what Kent was describing with and what you just mentioned for the war party, the defense contractors, the chicken hawks, etc.?
I found that the stupidest mistakes ever made in history have either been done intentionally, like you're implying, or they've been done out of incompetence. And I suppose it's probably a combination of both when I look at the Democrats, particularly in the Biden-Obama administrations. I don't think that they intentionally want to destroy the world, but they're doing a really good job of it. As you point out, they've enriched Iran, they've enabled Iran with weapons and nuclear weapons, and now whenever Iran does anything aggressive, they just pretend it isn't happening. So, in fact, what they're doing is encouraging a war, because by doing those two things, by enriching Iran, and then when Iran gets aggressive, pretending it isn't happening, Iran's going to keep pushing through its proxies, not Iran proper. The Iranians don't want a war with us. They're very happy to sacrifice their proxies. But at some point, we're going to have mass casualties of Americans. The ship is going to go down. And then the clamor of the people that you've just referred to, the neocons, whatever you want to call them, the war party, if the Republican and Democrats, they will all scream, well, we have to have a war with Iran. And that's a war we can't win. We could have prevented. We don't want. And we really don't know how to fight. So, again, use the economic weapons, but let everybody know, if you kill Americans, we're coming after the people who kill the Americans. Right now, that's just the proxies.
Well, and the proxy group that is claimed responsibility for those 3 Americans that were killed at the Jordanian-Syrian border is in Iraq. And Iraq is, one of our partners in peace in the Middle East, according to, the stated position of the State Department. And yet you have all these Iranian proxies operating in Iraq. You have some Iranian sympathizers in the government in Iraq. And yet, again, here we are, we're underwriting them in part, and by extension, underwriting Iranian proxies, pretending to have a partner in peace, like we were attempting for the last decade under Obama and Biden to have a partner in peace in Iran. And it's all phony.
Yes, it is all phony. Tragically, all phony. And are they doing it deliberately, or do they just have a warped worldview? The Obama-Biden administration, they thought if they could placate and appease Iran enough, Iran would become a responsible international stakeholder, and then wouldn't go to war, wouldn't develop nuclear weapons, wouldn't have terrorism. Well, that was dead wrong. Instead, they should have looked at the Iranian constitution and understood that from the very beginning, from the very inception of the Iranian revolutionary movement, that Iran has had 2 goals, and only 2 goals. They've had the goal of getting the United States out of the Middle East and destroying the state of Israel. They have not wavered from those goals for a minute. They have changed tactics, whether it's initially it was supposed to be the Iranian military that was going to do it, and then now it's the proxies that are going to do it, and now it's the terrorists that are going to do it. It's just understand that you're not going to sweet-talk Iran out of its ambitions. It doesn't want to enrich its people. It doesn't want to make life better for Iranians. It wants to get America out of the Middle East, destroy Israel. Oh, and by the way, if you can kill Jews, that's all the better.
KT McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thank you as always.
Honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Have you been struggling to find an easy, safe, and secure document